The chaplain's finger was locked on the trigger when he realized he was praying out loud. Not a gentle, calm prayer from the altar, but a desperate, raw whisper between bursts of gunfire. His hands were slick with blood. Some of it was his. Most of it was not. The machine gun bucked in his grip, empty shell casings raining down around his knees, the barrel glowing faintly in the night. Somewhere beyond the ruins and smoke, men were screaming in German, and closer, at his back, the wounded were moaning his name. "Father, Father, please." The voice came from behind him, weak, barely audible over the echo of distant explosions. He did not dare turn. He could see movement in the dark, shapes trying to crawl closer along the broken remains of the bridge. If even one of them reached the midpoint, if even one grenade landed among the wounded behind him, it would all be over. "Just a little closer," he whispered. But he was not talking to the Germans. He was talking to the dawn. Hours earlier, Father Michael Donovan had believed he understood war. He had been wrong. September 1944, Western Europe. The official line said the Germans were on the run, the war nearly won, the enemy collapsing. On paper, it looked clean and simple. On the ground, it looked like burned villages, dead civilians in ditches, and medics who stopped looking men in the eye when they realized there was nothing left to save. The field hospital was a barn that smelled of iodine, blood, and fear. Donovan moved between the cots, his chaplain's cross stitched to a uniform that was no longer truly clean, no matter how often he washed it. Men grabbed for him as he passed, fingers tightening on his sleeve, eyes wide and searching. "Father, how bad is it? Father, tell my wife I did not suffer. Father, am I going to make it?" He lied more now than he ever had in his life. Before the war, he had preached about truth, about courage, about facing reality with faith. In Pennsylvania, that had sounded noble. In France and Belgium, it sounded cruel. "You are going to pull through," he told a boy whose lower body was missing under the blanket. "You did good. Your family will be proud," he told a man who had broken down sobbing as he described how he froze under fire. He held hands, listened to confessions, whispered prayers over men whose dog tags he barely had time to read. He wrote letters he did not sign with his own name, because sometimes it was better if a widow believed her husband had composed his own last words. Outside, artillery thumped steadily, distant, but never truly gone. Donovan stepped out of the barn to catch a breath of what passed for fresh air. It smelled like smoke from a nearby village that had not been there the last time he came through. He lit a cigarette, even though he had promised 3 times now that the last one really would be the last. The match shook in his hand. He noticed it and carefully closed his fingers tighter, forcing the tremble to stop. Padre. Lieutenant Mark Hayes approached with his helmet under his arm, fatigue etched into the lines around his eyes. He was not an officer who shouted because he enjoyed it. He shouted because men died when he did not. "We move out in 40 minutes, Hayes said. "Ravensbrook Bridge. Division wants it taken and held by nightfall. It is the last decent crossing for 10 miles. If the Krauts blow it, we lose time we do not have." "How bad?" Donovan asked. "Intel says light resistance," Hayes said, then added dryly, "which means anything from empty village to Panzer Division." They both knew how much the words on the reports were worth. 2 platoons, Hayes continued. "First takes the far side, second secures this side and covers. You are with second." Donovan nodded. He always went where there would be wounded, but not where anyone expected him to shoot back. That was the unspoken rule. He did not carry a weapon. He never had. Not once. He had made that promise to himself and to God the day he agreed to put on the uniform. He thought about the first time he had seen a man die violently. It had been in Sicily, 2 years earlier. A shell had landed close, throwing a corporal into the air, shredding his chest. Donovan had pressed his hands to the wound, feeling the heart stutter beneath his fingers. The medic had taken one look and walked past. "No use," he had said. Donovan had stayed until the corporal's eyes went glassy. After that, nothing in his parish back home would ever seem truly urgent again. The march to Ravensbrück was quieter than it should have been. No marching songs, no nervous jokes, not even the usual grumbling. The men were too tired and had seen too much. They trudged past blackened shells of houses, wrecked vehicles rusting in ditches, an overturned ambulance with a red cross still visible under the soot. Private Daniel Chen broke the silence as he fell in step beside the chaplain. "Father," he said, "is it a sin to bargain with God?" "Depends what you are bargaining with," Donovan replied. "I told him if he gets me through this, I will never drink again," Chen said. Then I remembered I already promised that last month, so I am not sure if it still counts. Donovan looked at him. 20 years old, maybe. A harmonica player who had once confessed that he was more afraid of freezing under fire than of dying. The kid carried letters from a girl back home in his left breast pocket, close to his heart. "She wrote me again," Chen said. "She is pregnant. March, they said. Maybe, if the dates are right. Then you have one more reason to stay low when bullets start flying," Donovan said. Chen laughed, but there was a crack in it. "You pray for men like me, Father?" he asked. "I pray for everyone," Donovan said. He did not add that he prayed harder for the ones who told him they had something waiting for them at home. The war did not care who had a baby on the way. The column reached the outskirts of Ravensbrück late in the afternoon. The sky was an ugly gray, low and heavy, pressing down on the world. The bridge itself was old stone with an iron railing arching over a fast, cold river. On the far bank, the town smoldered, flames licking at ruined roofs. It was quiet, too quiet. Hayes signaled a halt, sent scouts forward. They crawled along the verge, checked the approaches, peered through binoculars. After 10 minutes, they returned. "Looks clear, sir. No movement, no visible positions." "Looks clear," Hayes muttered. "My favorite phrase." He split the unit. First platoon would cross and secure the far side. Second would hold the near side, ready to provide covering fire. It was textbook, the kind of maneuver they taught at schools that were nowhere near artillery. "Padre, you stay back with second," Hayes said. "If someone is going to get shot, it should not be you." "Men get more religious when they are being shot at," Donovan said. "You might want me up there." "Not happening," Hayes replied. "God can hear them from this side of the river." First platoon stepped onto the bridge. The men spread out, careful, rifles at the ready, but muzzles not yet fully raised. Boots clanked on the iron plates embedded in the stone. Somewhere a raven called, sounding almost offended at the disturbance. They were halfway across when the world split open. The explosion came from the center of the bridge, under the leading files. The sound hit first, a brutal, concussive crack that punched through Donovan's chest and stole the breath from his lungs. Then came heat, A slap of dust and shattered stone, bodies flung sideways and upward like rag dolls. Donovan did not remember falling, but he came to on his back, ears ringing, the sky a swirling haze of dust and smoke. For a moment, he thought no sound existed anymore. Then the screaming cut through the haze. The middle section of the bridge was gone, torn open into a jagged chasm. Men who had been standing on solid stone seconds ago were now in the water below, thrashing and vanishing in streaks of red. Others lay twisted along the edge, some missing limbs, some not moving at all. Then the machine guns opened up. Muzzle flashes chattered from the far bank, from broken windows and piles of rubble that had looked like harmless debris a minute earlier. Bullets tore into the survivors on the bridge. Men tried to crawl for cover that did not exist. Some went over the side, choosing the river over the open killing ground. "Cover! Cover!" Hayes shouted, though there was almost none to be had. Second platoon dropped and scrambled, firing back toward the flashes. Donovan did not. He was already running toward the wounded. Instinct pulled him forward faster than fear could drag him back. He sprinted to the nearest man, a sergeant with half his face shredded and one eye gone. Donovan dropped, pressed a bandage to what was left of the cheek, realized it was useless, and moved on. A body near the edge rolled, coughing. Chen. He was on his back, staring at the sky, his hands clamped weakly to his chest. Blood seeped between his fingers in bright pulses. For an instant his eyes were clear, focused on Donovan. "Father," he choked. "It is cold." Donovan pressed his hands over the wound, feeling the hot, slick life pumping out under his palms. "Stay with me, Daniel," he said. "Stay with me. Breathe." "I cannot feel my legs," Chen whispered. "Father, I do not want to die here." "You are not dying here. Listen to me. You are going to see your child. You hear me? You hold on." He knew, even as he said it, that it was impossible. The chest was too torn, the bleeding too heavy. The medic, crawling toward them, shook his head once, sharp and final, before moving past to someone he might still be able to help. Chen's eyes flicked to Donovan's, panic and something like shame flickering through. "I was scared," he rasped. "Earlier. I told you. I was scared of freezing. Out there. I do not want to be a coward." "You were not a coward," Donovan said. "You crossed that bridge. You did your duty. You stayed on your feet. There is no cowardice in you." Chen tried to smile and coughed instead, red bubbles forming on his lips. "Tell her," he whispered, voice barely audible now. "Tell Sarah I did not run. Tell my baby I tried." "I will," Donovan said. "You have my word." Chen's gaze went past him then, toward something Donovan could not see. His chest rose once, then again, then stopped. Donovan stayed frozen for a heartbeat too long, still pressing his hands to a wound that no longer mattered. The next shot hit the stone inches from his knee, throwing chips into his face and snapping him back to motion. He dragged Chen's body toward the relative cover of a buckled railing, more for his own sanity than any tactical reason. Then he went back for the living. He crawled, ran, carried, pulled. A man with a shattered leg screaming for morphine. Another sobbing as he clutched at a missing hand, fingers still flexing in a reflex that no longer had any purpose. Donovan moved through blood and grit and spent casings, shouting for bandages and stretchers that did not exist. The firefight burned itself out slowly, like a fuse on a bomb that never quite reaches the end. The German guns fell mostly silent, either satisfied with what they had done or cautious about pushing too close to the American rifles now dug in behind whatever cover they could find. When the last shots faded, the bridge looked like a scene from a nightmare. Smoke drifted over the broken span. Bodies lay in twisted positions that defied the way joints were supposed to bend. The river took some of them, carrying them downstream in slow, uncaring currents. "Status?" Hayes asked hoarsely, one hand pressed to a bloody bandage on his shoulder. "First platoon is gone," someone answered. "Maybe 10 still breathing. Maybe." They started to talk about pulling back, about regrouping, about artillery. Then the sound reached them. Engines, not trucks, heavier. A grinding metallic growl coming from the road behind them, the way they had come. Men turned, climbing to vantage points, looking through binoculars. "Armor," the scout said. "German armor. At least 4 Panthers. Maybe more. They are blocking the road." The air changed. It was like watching a room fill with water, slowly but unstoppably. There was no route back now. The only path was forward across a half-destroyed bridge, and the town beyond was full of enemy positions they could not see. Hayes swallowed hard. "They will not push the tanks onto the bridge at night," he said. "Too risky. They will pin us here, pick us apart. We cannot stay in the open. We fall back onto the bridge, use the rubble as cover, and hold until reinforcements can fight through." "Hold how long?" someone asked. "Until morning," Hayes said. "Or until we are all dead. Those are the options." They pulled back to the broken structure, dragging wounded with them. The middle span was a jagged gap, the charred stone edges like broken teeth. What remained of the bridge became a cramped, uneven strongpoint. They positioned rifles behind chunks of masonry, set a makeshift aid station in the lee of a collapsed section. Night closed in fast. The temperature dropped. The moans of the wounded filled the dark like a low, constant chorus. Donovan moved in that darkness, kneeling beside one man, then another. He cleaned what wounds he could, gave morphine when it was available, held hands when there was nothing else left to offer. He heard confessions that were more like panicked babbling than structured sin. But he listened anyway. "I left him there, Father. I left my friend when the shelling started. Please, please, please. I shot a man who was running away. I did. He was ours. I did it. I do not want to see his face when I close my eyes. I stole morphine and used it on myself when the others were worse off." One by one, their secrets poured out, desperate attempts to balance the scales before the world ended. Donovan took it all, stored it in the same overfilled place inside himself, where he kept the voices of the already dead. Private Jack Morrison lay propped against a chunk of stone, an M1919 machine gun set up in front of him on its bipod. His guts were wrapped in makeshift bandages that oozed through slowly, the white-stained dark. He had been hit by shrapnel when the bridge blew, but he had refused to leave the gun until his arms started to shake too hard to control the recoil. "Father," Morrison called, his voice rough. Donovan knelt beside him. "You should be lying down," Donovan said. "You need rest. You have lost too much blood." "I am not getting better, Father," Morrison said. "We both know that." "Sometimes men surprise us," Donovan replied, out of habit, more than conviction. Morrison glanced at the machine gun. "That is not the surprise you need tonight." He coughed, gritting his teeth as pain tore through him. "Listen, that gun is why we are still alive. They tested us twice already. Small probes, scouts. They are feeling us out. When they come for real, they are not going to walk into our rifles at 50 yards. They will try to rush the bridge, get close, overwhelm us, throw grenades into the wounded. I know, Donovan said quietly. Do you see anyone else who can keep that road covered? Morrison asked. Donovan looked around. The able-bodied men were few, exhausted, barely holding on to their weapons. A kid whose helmet looked too large for his head was sitting with his back to the stone, eyes wide, hands trembling around his rifle. I do not fight, Donovan said. It is not just preference. It is my oath, my role. I am here to save souls, not to take lives. Morrison's eyes hardened. If you do not, they die, he said. Simple as that. Those boys. The ones telling you they are sorry for things they did 3 years ago. The ones calling for their mothers in their sleep. You think the men coming for us will spare them because you kept your hands clean? Donovan's jaw tightened. There is a line, he said. If I cross it, I am not sure I can ever come back. There is no coming back from a bullet in the head either, Morrison shot back. You think God is up there with a clipboard, checking boxes? Ah, Father Donovan refused to touch a weapon? So all the men who bled out while he clung to his principles do not count? Is that what you think? The words hit harder than any shell. I have seen you. Morrison's voice dropped, turning more personal. You run toward the wounded when everyone else hits the dirt. You hold them while they die so they are not alone. You write to their families. You do things most of us cannot bring ourselves to do. But this is not about you anymore. This is about them. He nodded toward the cluster of wounded, huddled in the shadows. They trust you. If you tell them they will make it to dawn, some of them will believe it. But if nobody is on that gun when the Krauts make their move, dawn will not matter. The only thing that will matter is how many tags we manage to collect before the flies start. Donovan did not answer immediately. The machine gun sat between them, dark and heavy, angled toward the approach. It looked nothing like the wooden cross above his childhood altar, and yet in this moment it felt like its opposite twin. I am asking you for something, Morrison said, voice weakening. Not as a soldier, as a dying man. I am asking you to promise me that gun will not be empty when they come. You are asking me to kill, Donovan said. I am asking you to keep your flock alive, Morrison replied. Use whatever words you need to make it fit inside your head, but you know what this is. Donovan thought of Chen, staring at the sky, asking not to die a coward. He thought of the boy who had admitted to shooting a deserter, and now saw that face every time he blinked. He thought of all the men who had begged him to tell their families they died bravely, even when they had died screaming. Morrison watched him, breathing shallowly, every rise of his chest an effort. Promise me, he said. Please. The word please did it. I promise, Donovan said quietly. Morrison sagged back, some tightness leaving his shoulders. His eyes closed for a moment, then opened again. Thank you, Father, he whispered. For what it is worth, I think he will understand. Minutes later, Morrison's breathing slowed and stopped. Donovan closed his eyes and murmured a prayer over him, though the words felt thinner than they ever had. When he finished, the machine gun was still there, waiting. He stared at it for a long time. In seminary, they had argued about just war, about whether violence could ever be holy. Back then, it had been an academic exercise, something to be phrased in careful Latin and debated in thin, dry voices. None of the men in that room had smelled burning flesh while they talked. None of them had knelt in mud soaked with the blood of a kid whose only real crime was being exactly where someone else's artillery landed. He reached for the gun. His hand hovered above it, fingers shaking in a way he could no longer control. His mind screamed to pull back, to walk away, to leave the weapon lying where it was and refuse to bend. But behind him, a man whimpered in his sleep, a bad dream dragging him back to some shell crater or ambush. Another whispered his wife's name over and over, like a charm against the dark. Donovan wrapped his fingers around the cold metal and lifted. The weight surprised him. It was heavier than a cross, more awkward, less forgiving. He settled it into position behind a low wall of broken stone, checked the belt, the latch, the feed. He had seen men work these guns thousands of times, but always from a few steps back, always as an observer, never as the one whose finger completed the circuit between calm and slaughter. He lay down behind it, cheek against the rough stock, eyes aligned with the iron sights. The road beyond the bridge lay in shadow, broken by debris and shell holes. Somewhere out there, men were massing, checking weapons, fastening grenades to their belts. "Forgive me," he whispered, though it was not clear to whom. He heard the first German voice a minute later, drifting through the darkness. Then another. Boots scraping stone. The distinct, clipped cadence of orders being passed along a line. The bridge of Ravensbrook, half destroyed and slick with blood, had become a trap. And Father Michael Donovan, ordained to serve God and man without ever lifting a weapon, now lay behind a machine gun, waiting to decide who would live long enough to see the sunrise. The first German died without ever seeing who killed him. He broke from the darkness at a crouch, moving fast across the broken approach, helmet low, rifle tight against his chest. For a second, his silhouette was perfectly framed between two shattered sections of stone. That was all it took. The machine gun slammed against Father Michael Donovan's shoulder. The first burst tore the man off his feet and flung him backward into the dark. The bridge went quiet for half a heartbeat. No church bell, no choir, no organ had ever sounded as loud in Donovan's ears as the sudden silence that followed that first burst. His lungs refused to work. His hands clenched around the grip so hard his knuckles ached. He had killed a man. Not blessed him, not absolved him, not comforted him, killed him. The second German came in from the flank, and there was no more time to think. More shadows moved at the edge of the ruined roadway, trying to dart between cover. Someone shouted in German, voice sharp and furious, and three more broke into a run, sprinting toward the shattered midpoint of the bridge. Donovan squeezed the trigger again. The gun roared, tracers lancing through the night, stone chips exploding from walls and road. One man spun as if punched, another pitched forward, sliding on his chest until his boots stopped jerking. "Keep them off the bridge," someone yelled behind Donovan. "Do not let them reach the wounded." He did not turn. He kept the barrel fixed on the dark approach, searching for movement, listening past the ringing in his ears for the tiniest hint of boots, metal, breath. The German patrol had not expected resistance like this. They had seen a shattered bridge, a mauled American unit cut off, and assumed the job would be quick and clean. Cross the broken stone, finish off the wounded, hold the position until armor could roll up in the morning. Instead, they had run straight into a sustained, accurate wall of fire. At first, they tried to rush it. Short, sharp assaults, 3 or 4 men at a time. Donovan cut them down. The gun's barrel grew hotter. The belt rattled and fed. He felt each burst in his bones. "New belt," a voice called next to him. A terrified private fumbled forward with ammunition, trying not to look at the bodies strewn along the approach. His hands shook so badly, he dropped the first section. Donovan did not yell. He could hear the kid breathing too fast, on the edge of panic. "Take your time," Donovan said, his voice calmer than he felt. "We are not letting them through." The kid nodded, swallowed hard, and managed to lock the new belt in place. Minutes blurred, short lulls, sudden flurries of shots, shouts in German as they tried to talk each other into advancing again. Occasional rifle cracks from the American side as the few conscious defenders picked targets in the dark. Behind Donovan, the wounded shifted and moaned. Somewhere off to his right, a man sobbed quietly, not from pain, but because his nerves had finally snapped. "Father," a voice whispered from behind a chunk of stone. "Father, are we going to make it?" "Stay down," Donovan said, never taking his eyes from the sights. "You will see the sun. Just stay down." He could not afford to admit that he had no idea if that was true. In the short breaks between attacks, the guilt clawed its way up from his gut. He could see the first German's body in his mind. Not as an enemy, not as a uniform, but as a man. Somebody's son, somebody's brother, maybe somebody's father. He had ended that life like snapping a thread. He remembered a sermon from years ago before the war, where he had confidently told a sleepy congregation that all life was sacred, that violence always left scars on the soul of the one who wielded it. He had believed it. He still believed it. The problem was, now those two beliefs were slamming into a third, brutal fact. If he stopped, the men behind him would die screaming in the dark. "You did not start this," he told himself through clenched teeth. "You did not ask for this. You did not choose this field, this bridge, this night." It did not make much difference. The next attack came low and smart. The Germans rolled a smoke grenade forward first, letting it billow and spread, turning the approach into a gray, shifting wall. Under its cover, they sent men crawling, trying to snake along the edges and hug the shadows. The machine gun's advantage was sightlines. Blind it. And the defender was suddenly just another pair of eyes peering into nothing. Donovan tasted smoke and grit on his tongue. The shapes beyond the muzzle turned fuzzy, indistinct. He fired a short burst at where he thought movement might be, but it was like punching a fog bank. "Watch the edges," he yelled. "They will try to come along the sides." He listened, not for language this time, but for rhythm. The difference between a rolling stone and a boot nudging rubble aside. The scrape of metal on rock. The faint, forced exhale of a man pushing his body forward an inch at a time. There. Left side. Low. A barely audible scrape, followed by a shallow grunt. He swung the gun, fired a controlled burst along the base of the low wall. A cry answered him. Not rage, surprise, and agony. The sound of someone who thought they were invisible, suddenly made very, very visible. He forced himself not to flinch. The smoke thinned. Two more tried to sprint the remaining distance, using the last of the cover. They did not get far. Someone behind Donovan retched, the heaving loud in the brief silence that followed. "Eyes on your sector," a sergeant snapped weakly. "The Padre has the bridge." The bridge. Rubble. Blood. Shattered stone. Germans in front. Tanks behind. Wounded in the middle. And at the choke point, a priest behind a machine gun. Time crawled. Donovan lost any real sense of minutes. His world shrank to a narrow tunnel. The road, the front sight, the ghostly shapes trying to reach the midpoint. His shoulder throbbed from the constant recoil. His cheek was raw where it pressed against the stock. Each spent casing that bounced against his arm was a small burning brand. Somewhere in that stretch of dark hours, while he reloaded in a brief lull, someone staggered up next to him and dropped heavily behind the same cover. "Father, hey, look at me." He risked a glance. It was Lieutenant Hayes. His face was pale under the dirt, his bandage soaked through at the shoulder. Another fresh strip of cloth wrapped tight around his side. He should have been lying flat, but he did not know how to do that, while his men were still breathing. "How many?" Hayes asked, nodding toward the approach. "I do not know," Donovan answered honestly. "Too many. Fewer now." "Armor behind us is sitting tight," Hayes said. "They have got us boxed, but they are not moving up. They want their infantry to do the bleeding." "That is generous of them," Donovan said, surprised by the bitterness in his own voice. Hayes looked at the machine gun, then at Donovan. "When this started," Hayes said slowly, "I told myself you would never touch a weapon, that no matter how bad it got, you would stay who you are." "So did I," Donovan said. "How are you holding up?" Donovan kept his eyes on the darkness. "I know the names of 3 men I killed tonight," he said, "because I heard them shouted before they fell. I do not know how to file that alongside everything I have ever said about mercy and forgiveness." Hayes was quiet a moment. "You think I sleep well?" Hayes asked finally. "You think any of us do? I give orders and watch men I know walk into fire. I write to their families and leave things out so they can breathe again someday. None of us come out of this clean, Father. Not one." "Clean is not what I'm asking for," Donovan said. "I would settle for understandable." Hayes managed a tired half-smile. "You want it to make sense?" he said. "There is your problem. It does not. Not really. We are on a broken bridge in the middle of nowhere, fighting over stone that will not matter to anyone in 10 years. But if we leave, the men behind us die tonight, instead of 5 years from now in bed. So we stay." He nodded toward the wounded. "They need you alive more than God needs you spotless." Before Donovan could answer, a shot cracked from the dark, close and sharp. Stone splinters exploded between them. Hayes jerked, his body arching for a second, then slammed back onto the ground. Donovan grabbed his shoulder, expecting to feel blood. His fingers closed instead on the already soaked bandage. No fresh warmth, no new tearing. "Ricochet," Hayes grunted through clenched teeth. "I am too stubborn to die tonight." He forced himself to a sitting position, using the stone for support. "Listen," he said, voice lower now. "If they overrun this position, you do not stay. You get the ones who can move and you go over the side. River will be cold, but it will be life. You understand?" "I am not leaving the men who cannot walk," Donovan said. Hayes stared at him. "You think they want you to die on top of them?" he demanded. "You think Morrison wanted you to promise just so you could get riddled an hour later, standing between him and a grenade? Your job is to keep as many of them breathing as possible. Sometimes that means staying. Sometimes it means running." "You are asking the wrong man to run," Donovan said. "Then I am asking the only one who might listen," Hayes shot back. "You obeyed your conscience and picked up that gun. Good. Now obey it when it tells you they need you alive, not laid out on this stone like the rest." Any answer Donovan might have made was cut off by the sudden, unmistakable, metallic clink of something bouncing on rock near the edge of cover. Grenade. "Down!" someone screamed. Instinct took over. Donovan shoved Hayes sideways and ducked, pressing himself against the rough stone. The explosion came a second later, a brutal concussive blast that showered them with fragments and dust. His ears howled. A man cried out behind them, then went silent. Donovan forced himself up, vision swimming, and swung the gun toward the path the grenade must have come from. He fired, short, controlled bursts at ankle height along the lip of the approach. Two shapes tumbled into view, one folding inward, the other sprawled face down, arms out, like he was reaching for something he would never touch. The air filled with gunfire again. Rifles, submachine guns, the stuttering of a second enemy machine gun trying to pin down the defenders, while assault teams crept closer. Donovan adjusted his aim higher, sweeping the area where the flashes flared. He did not think beyond that. He could not afford to. If he allowed himself to picture individual faces, to hear accents, and imagine families behind each uniform, his finger would freeze. Another belt, another barrage, another few minutes shaved off the distance between now and dawn. In the midst of it, something unexpected happened. A German voice shouted something that was not an order. It was closer than the others, maybe 15 meters away, just beyond the lip of the broken stone. A fast, panicked string of words that translated in Donovan's head even through the din. "Please do not shoot! Wounded here! We are wounded!" The fire on the German side stuttered, hesitated. A different voice, gruffer, barked something back. The first one answered, more frantic now. Hayes squinted through the smoke. "They have got men stuck out there," he said. Donovan could see it in his mind. A squad pinned, some hit by his own gunfire, lying in the open between the town and the shattered bridge, too close to crawl back easily, too far to be truly safe on either side. One of them shouted again, this time in broken, heavily accented English, "Do not shoot! Wounded! Amerikaner! Do not shoot! Medic!" The word cut straight through Donovan. Medic. He had answered that cry from American throats 100 times. Legs blown off, arms hanging by threads of skin, men begging him not to leave, not to let them die alone. Now it was coming from the dark ahead, from the same direction he had been pouring fire into all night. The gun felt suddenly twice as heavy. If he held his fire, if he let someone crawl out there to drag those men in, every second of mercy would be another chance for a rifle barrel to swing up, for a grenade to come sailing into the heart of his line. If he did not, if he kept that approach a no-man's land of dead and dying, the wounded out there would bleed out in the mud while he listened. He realized he was grinding his teeth hard enough to hurt. "You hear that?" Hayes asked quietly. "Yes," Donovan said. "What are you going to do?" Donovan did not answer. One of the Germans called again. "Medic, please. Hilfe. Help us." Behind Donovan, one of the younger Americans whispered, "Maybe we could... they are wounded, even if they are Krauts." He let the thought hang, unfinished. Nobody wanted to say out loud what they were really thinking. That at some point, enemy stopped mattering, and only pain did. Donovan's instinct screamed to move, to crawl out with nothing in his hands but bandages, to do the thing he knew how to do, the thing that made sense when nothing else did. He had done it before. In Italy, he had walked into a shell crater between lines to tend a dying German and an American, lying side by side, both too weak to even flinch at the incoming rounds arcing overhead. He had held their hands as they died within minutes of each other, their fingers entwined without either of them realizing it. But that had been a lull, a frozen moment in a different kind of fight. This was not that. This was a live-moving, lethal puzzle where one wrong act of mercy could mean 20 men paid for it. "Do not," Hayes said. "You go out there now. You will not make it 5 steps." "They are calling for a medic," Donovan said. "They are also being used as bait," Hayes replied. "You think their sergeant is not watching through a scope, waiting for you to stand up? The first man who goes over that wall will be dead before he hits the ground. That is not mercy. That is just one more body." The voice called again. "Please." Donovan closed his eyes for a second. He could almost picture the man, face pressed to cold stone, blood soaking into his sleeve, the weight of his own rifle useless against the brutality of shrapnel and distance. "God help me," Donovan whispered. He kept his hands on the gun. He held the line. It was the ugliest choice he had made in his life, and he felt every shred of his training, every lesson drilled into him about compassion and universality, buckling under the strain. A few seconds later, the German machine gun opened up again from a different angle. They had not stopped fighting. The plea for a medic disappeared into the renewed clatter of shots. The assault continued in waves, short rushes, grenades that bounced too close. One exploded near the edge of the wounded, spraying hot fragments. A man screamed, and the smell of burned cloth and flesh washed over the bridge. Donovan did not know if that new wound belonged to someone who had already lost a limb or to a man who had been nearly whole 30 seconds earlier. At one point, during a frantic reload, he realized his mouth was moving on its own. "Our Father, who art in heaven." The words came out clipped between gasps, not in the smooth, measured cadence he had used at altars, but in short, raw bursts. A survival chant, a rope in the dark that his mind had grabbed even while his fingers fed a belt into the hungry mechanism that kept everyone behind him breathing. "Holy be thy name." He caught himself, shut his mouth, angry for a second at the reflex. Angry because it felt wrong to invoke holiness while shredding strangers at 50 yards. Then he thought about Morrison's face, drawn tight with pain as he asked for a promise. He thought about Chen's last request, about the men behind him whispering names in their shallow sleep. If he was damned for this, he was not going alone. Hours bled away. Eventually, the character of the gunfire shifted. Shorter bursts, less coordination. Shouting that sounded frustrated, not eager. The Germans were tired too. They had lost men in every rush. Their patrol had come expecting a simple cleanup, and instead slammed into a stubborn holdout anchored by a machine gun position that refused to die. Somewhere further back, a radio crackled in German. Orders snapped and replied to. The attacks thinned, turned into probing fire rather than full attempts to storm the broken span. Distant engines rumbled again, deeper this time. Not the armor behind the Americans, something across the river on the far bank. Movement in the town itself. "They are pulling some of them back," Hayes said. "They do not want to bleed out an entire patrol trying to take one ruined bridge before daylight." "Or they are just waiting for something bigger," Donovan said. "Maybe both," Hayes replied. The gaps between shots grew longer. The moans of the wounded seemed louder in the quiet. Donovan's arms felt like lead. The machine gun barrel smoked faintly. His shoulder throbbed. His trigger finger cramped when he tried to open and close it. "Father," a weak voice said from behind him. Is it over?" Not yet, Donovan said. But it is changing. He risked a quick look over his shoulder. The makeshift aid station was a mess of bandages, blood, and mud. Men lay shoulder to shoulder, some awake and watching him with wide eyes, others drifting in and out of consciousness. One of the youngest, a private whose name Donovan could not dredge up from his exhausted memory, stared at him like he was seeing him for the first time. "You are different," the boy said quietly. "You look different." "How so?" Donovan asked. "When you got here," the boy whispered, "you looked like a priest wearing a uniform. Now you look like the rest of us." Donovan did not know if that was meant as comfort or accusation. He turned back toward the approach. The horizon beyond the town was shifting. Black had become gray. Just a shade, just a suggestion, but it was there. The hard edge of structures against the sky softened at the top, like someone had smudged charcoal with a thumb. Dawn was coming. It did not guarantee survival. Reinforcements might be delayed. The Germans might try one last, massive push in the half-light. The tanks behind them might finally decide the bridge was worth risking a riskier move. But darkness, at least, was no longer forever. "See?" Donovan said under his breath, to no one and everyone. "You held. You stayed." He was not sure if he was talking to his men, to Morrison's memory, or to himself. The machine gun sat in front of him, smoking and silent for the moment, pointed down a road littered with still shapes. A bridge that had been just another objective on a map hours ago was now a place that would never leave his mind. One more night in a war full of them. And it was not over yet. The river looked almost peaceful in the first light of morning. Mist clung to the surface, softening the brutal reality of the night. The water flowed around chunks of fallen stone, carried bits of shattered wood and scrap metal downstream, washed blood from the broken middle span of Ravensbrook Bridge as if trying to erase what had happened there. It could not. Father Michael Donovan's world had narrowed to three things: the weight of the machine gun under his hands, the faces of the men behind him, and the bodies on the road in front. He had stopped counting the dead hours ago. What he could not stop counting were the choices. Every man lying out there was a ledger entry he would never be able to balance. Each burst of fire, each decision to hold the trigger a fraction of a second longer, had carved another mark into a part of him he had once assumed was untouchable. "Padre," someone whispered behind him. "You see anything?" He squinted through the gray. The German side of the bridge's approach was a jagged mess of rubble, craters, and twisted forms. Some did not move at all. Others shifted occasionally, a leg twitching, an arm dragging weakly, a man trying to crawl a few inches closer to something he would never reach. "I see them," Donovan said. "How many?" the same voice asked. "Enough." He did not specify whether that meant enough to attack again, or enough to haunt his sleep. The gun felt different now. At the start of the night, it had been alien, a piece of cold machinery that did not belong in his hands. Somewhere between the 1st and 50th burst, that had changed. His fingers knew the exact pressure needed to fire a 2-second stream instead of a 5. His ear recognized the sound the belt made when it was down to its last rounds. His shoulder had molded to the recoil. That scared him more than anything. The first man he killed had torn something inside him. The 10th had numbed it. By the time the sky started to pale, he was operating in a space beyond thinking, beyond feeling, where the only thing that mattered was keeping the road in front of him impassable. The numbness was worse than the horror. Horror meant you were still reacting like a human being. Numbness meant you were adjusting. He had spent years trying to become less like the world, and more like the God he preached about. One night, on a broken bridge, had dragged him violently in the other direction. "Father." The voice was soft, right at his shoulder. For a split second his muscles tensed, ready to swing the gun. He caught himself and glanced sideways. Private Lewis knelt there, helmet askew. Dirt streaked across a baby face that did not look old enough to shave. His glasses were cracked, one lens smeared with something he had not wiped away. "Yes?" Donovan asked. "I heard you," Lewis said. "Earlier. You were praying and shooting at the same time." "I did not realize I was praying out loud," Donovan said. Lewis swallowed. "It helped," he said. "Some of the guys back there, they heard you. They thought, I do not know, that maybe if even you were scared enough to talk to God like that, then it was okay that they were terrified too." Donovan let out a short, humorless breath. "Is that what it sounded like?" he asked. "Terror?" "What else would it be?" Lewis answered. "You think we do not see your hands shaking when the gun stops? You think we do not hear you when you talk to the ones who are already gone?" Donovan considered denying it, then decided there was no point. "Do you hate me for what I did tonight?" he asked quietly. "For what I am still doing?" Lewis blinked. "For killing Germans," he said. "No, Father, with respect. I am grateful. I like breathing." "That is not what I mean," Donovan said. "I mean for being the one who decided who gets to move and who stays down. For sitting in judgment in the worst way possible." Lewis looked past him at the road, at the torn bodies and abandoned rifles. "You did not put them there," Lewis said. "They came to kill us. You just met them halfway." That was one way to look at it. Too simple for Donovan, too clean, but simple had a certain seduction right now. "Besides," Lewis added, voice dropping, "it is not like you were some angel before this. We all heard you cuss when you broke your toe on that ammo crate last month." Despite himself, Donovan almost laughed. The sound died quickly when movement flickered at the far edge of the approach. He went still, all internal conversations shut off in an instant. "Down," he murmured. "Everyone down." Shapes gathered in the gray clustered farther back than the night assaults had started. He could see officers now, or at least men with a different posture, pointing, gesturing, moving individuals into position. No more hasty probes. This looked organized, methodical. "They are resetting," Hayes said from somewhere behind him. The lieutenant's voice was ragged, edged with pain, but still functional. "New push, bigger. They know daylight changes the equation. They want this over before the sun is fully up." Donovan's jaw clenched. "So do we," he said. He adjusted his sights, mindful of the rising light. Shadows would shrink. Cover that had been deep darkness would become simple dimness. He would see them better. They would see him better too. "Father," Hayes called, louder now. "Listen to me. We are low on ammo. You have got maybe 2 or 3 full heavy engagements left in that thing before you are just making noise." "I know," Donovan said. "I do not think you do," Hayes said. "Because when that last belt runs dry, you are going to have to choose. Stay and die fighting over an empty gun, or pull back and try to get as many of these men off this rock as you can." "I am not abandoning this position," Donovan snapped. This position is stone, Hayes said. These men are flesh. One matters more than the other. The German formation shifted again. Donovan caught sight of something that made his stomach drop a few inches. They were bringing up a light mortar. 2 men hustled it into place behind the ruins of a low wall, dropping rounds into a shallow, waiting pit of supplies. Mortar, he said. Left side of the road, behind that collapsed facade. Can you reach it? Hayes asked. If they are stupid, Donovan said. If they bunch up. The first shell arced into the air a moment later, a dark shape briefly visible against the paling sky. Donovan followed its path, even though he knew it was pointless. Once it left the tube, all you could do was hope it did not land where you were. It landed 50 yards short, on the American side of the bridge, off to the right. The blast shook the stone, showered everyone with dust, and sent one wounded man into a panicked fit. A second round followed. Closer. They are walking it in, Hayes said. Trying to find your muzzle flash, Father. They want to delete that gun. Then we do not give them time, Donovan said. He took a breath, squeezed the trigger, and raked the area where the mortar crew had just been. The gun spat fire, tracers slashing through the gray. The first burst struck the ruined wall, sending up a spray of fragments and dust. The second chewed into the ground beside it. For a heartbeat, there was no movement there. Then one of the crew stumbled out of cover, clutching his side, trying to drag himself behind a burned-out car farther back. Another shape lay twisted in the mortar pit, unmoving. Donovan squeezed again, finishing the job, because leaving it half done would have been worse for his own men. The mortar's next round never came. The Germans adjusted. They learned fast. That was one thing the war had taught everyone. If a tactic failed once, twice, 3 times, someone either adapted or died. This time, instead of charging straight up the center, a squad peeled off to the right, hugging the decayed stump of an old outer wall, trying to get an angle on the bridge that the machine gun could not cover cleanly. Donovan tracked as far as he could, fired, hit 2, but 3 more slipped out of his line of sight. Right side, he shouted. They are trying to flank the main span. Rifle fire cracked from the American positions. A few shots, too high, too rushed. One of the Germans went down, another spun and took cover, but at least one kept moving, getting closer. A grenade sailed in, arcing just under the level of the remaining railing. Donovan saw it in midair, a small, hard object that glinted once as it spun. He did not think. There was no time for thought. He let go of the gun, lunged sideways, and caught it on the bounce before it could roll deeper into the cluster of wounded. For a fraction of a second, his brain registered the weight, the texture, the cold certainty that this thing was death on a timer. He moved. He flung it over the edge of the broken span, his arm straining with the effort. The blast went off a split second before it cleared the lip. The shock wave hammered him, slamming his body against the stone. Splinters and fragments ripped into his sleeve, his side, his neck. A hot line of pain seared across his cheek. He hit the ground hard, ears ringing, vision full of static. Someone grabbed his collar and dragged him backward. "Father! Father!" Lewis's voice, frantic and high. "You okay? Jesus, you okay?" Donovan blinked hard, forcing the blur to clear. He touched his face. His fingers came away bloody, but the wound felt shallow. His arm throbbed. Shrapnel had torn through the outer flesh, but not deep enough to stop movement. "I am fine," he said. though fine had lost all meaning hours ago. Gun. He crawled back to the weapon, fingers fumbling for the grips. The metal was slick under his injured hand, and he had to adjust his grip to keep it steady. He fired again, barely registering the sting in his side. The next German who tried to rise into view was cut down mid-step. Behind him, a different sound started up. Distant at first. Faint. Easy to miss under the cracking rifles and chattering guns. Artillery, not enemy. The thunder came from behind them, from the American lines. Holy hell, Hayes breathed. They finally got the message through. A second later, the first American shell landed on the far bank. It did not discriminate. Explosions tore through the German side of the approach, through their forming lines, through their fallback positions in the town. The air filled with dust, smoke, and flying debris. Donovan saw a figure thrown into the air like a rag doll and slammed against a wall that collapsed on top of him. Another round hit farther back, near where the mortar had been. The shock wave rolled across the river, rattling Donovan's teeth. The German assault broke. Some tried to run back. Others hit the ground and stayed there. The organized lines dissolved into scattered individuals, scrambling for any cover they could find that was not already collapsing. "Stay down," Hayes shouted. "Stay tucked in. Our own guns do not know exactly where we are." Shell after shell screamed overhead, landing in the town, along the riverbank, in the ruins that had sheltered the enemy through the night. Donovan pressed himself behind the low wall, hunching over the machine gun, using his body as one more shield for the men behind him. The world became white flashes and black clouds. The bridge shook with every impact. Dust poured from cracks. Somewhere to the left, a chunk of railing finally gave way and plunged into the water below. It went on for what felt like forever and could not have been more than a few minutes. Then, as abruptly as it started, the barrage ceased. The silence afterward was jarring. Ears rung, men blinked, coughing, trying to clear their lungs and minds. The German side of the river was unrecognizable. Where there had been ruined buildings, there were now smoking craters. Where there had been ordered positions and planned assaults, there were bodies, debris, and ragged survivors staggering between whatever pieces of cover remained. Do we go now?" Lewis asked. "Do we try to cross?" "No," Hayes said immediately. "We do not move until we see friendly boots coming up behind us. Last thing we need is to run into the tail end of our own barrage or walk into some hidden pocket of pissed-off survivors." Donovan scanned the road again. Movement, small and halting, caught his eye. Not a soldier rushing into a new position. A man dragging himself by his arms, legs limp behind him. His uniform was torn, one boot missing. Blood smeared a trail on the cracked asphalt. The wounded German from earlier? Maybe. Maybe not. It did not really matter. There were more than enough of his kind out there. He was inching toward a chunk of collapsed wall. Away from the bridge. Away from the Americans. No weapon in his hands. Donovan's finger twitched on the trigger. Reflex. Then stopped. He let out a shaky breath he had not realized he was holding, and lifted his gaze slightly. Beyond the crawling man, near the edge of the destroyed town, something new moved. A speck at first, then a shape. Armor. But not German. An American tank crested the rise on the far side, turret scanning, engine rumbling. Infantry walked in its shadow, uniforms and helmets marked with familiar shapes. Reinforcements. At last. For a second, the sight hit Donovan like a physical blow. Relief surged, ugly and overwhelming, mixing with exhaustion in a way that made his eyes burn. He had held. They had held. Long enough. The machine gun suddenly felt impossibly heavy. He eased his hands off it, flexing his fingers slowly. As the first American soldiers on the far bank took in the scene, destroyed bridge span, bodies strewn along the approach, a shattered town smoldering behind them, their attention snapped to the midpoint of the broken structure, to the handful of men dug in on the ruin, and to the lone figure slumped behind a machine gun, collar stained red, hands still shaking. A chaplain, with a weapon. The looks on their faces said everything. Shock, confusion, something close to disbelief. One of them raised binoculars, peered across the gap, then lowered them slowly. Is that a priest?" he asked, not quite trusting the words even as he said them. On the bridge, Father Michael Donovan sat back from the gun, the weight of what he had done settling fully onto his chest for the first time. The night was over. The shooting had stopped. And now, in the space that followed, came the questions he had been able to outrun only as long as the enemy kept coming. Reinforcements did not sound the way Father Michael Donovan had imagined. In sermons back home, victories had always arrived with trumpets, with choirs, with polished words about deliverance and glory. On Ravensbrook Bridge, they arrived as the grind of tank treads, the crunch of boots on broken stone, and the low murmur of men trying to understand what they were seeing. "Ceasefire! Ceasefire!" The order echoed from the far bank, rippling down the line of newly arrived infantry. Weapons lowered, muzzles dipped. The only sound left was the faded rumble of engines and the ragged breathing of the men on the shattered bridge. Donovan's ears still rang from the barrage. Everything sounded distant, as if the world had been stuffed with cotton. He watched as two infantrymen on the far side moved to the lip of the destroyed span and peered across the gap. "What the hell happened here?" one of them muttered. "Looks like they got hit hard and kept fighting," the other said. "Look at those bodies. Krauts are everywhere." "And the guy on the gun?" They both went quiet for a moment. Is that a chaplain?" On the bridge, Donovan pushed himself upright. His back screamed in protest. Every muscle felt a year older than it had the day before. The machine gun sat in front of him, barrel scorched, metal blackened. It looked almost alive, like some exhausted animal that had finally run out of fury. His fingers did not want to let go. He forced them to. "Padre," Lewis said softly behind him. "They are ours. We made it." Made it. The words did not fit in his head yet. Survived felt too big, too final. They were still sitting on a broken bridge, surrounded by dead men. The fact that some of the uniforms were now friendly did not change that. Medics from the far side arrived first, moving carefully over the remaining section of the bridge, stepping around cracks and holes that yawned down to the water below. They carried bags, stretchers, and a kind of tired efficiency that Donovan recognized. Men who had seen too many mornings like this. One of them, a stocky corporal with a weathered face, stopped when he reached Donovan's position. "Jesus," he breathed. "You really are a priest." He glanced at the cross on Donovan's collar, then at the machine gun, then at the bodies strewn across the approach on the German side. "How long were you on that thing?" the medic asked. "Long enough," Donovan said. The medic gave a low whistle. "I have seen some things," he said, "but I have never seen that." He did not specify which part he meant: the number of dead, the ruined bridge, or the chaplain hunched behind a weapon that had clearly not been used as decoration. "Start with the worst wounds," Donovan said. "Men with abdominal hits, chest wounds, heavy bleeding. Some of them have been hanging on for hours." "You have been triaging?" the medic asked. "Yes." "The man who set up an aid station and a kill zone at the same time," the medic muttered. "Hell of a arsome, Father." Others followed. They moved among the wounded, checking pulses, changing bandages, pushing morphine when needed. Stretchers began to take shape from whatever scrap they could find. The air filled with new sounds, the clatter of gear, the grunt of men lifting, the soft, strained groans of those being shifted. Donovan helped where he could. A hand here, a reassurance there, a few last prayers for men who slipped away now that their bodies finally relaxed under painkillers. The rhythm of this work was familiar. It grounded him in a way the firefight had not. But every time he closed his eyes, even for a second, the night came back. The muzzle flashes in the dark, the weight of the grenade in his hand, the voice crying "Medic!" from the German side while he stayed frozen behind the gun. "Father?" The new voice belonged to a captain who had crossed over with the first wave of reinforcements. He was in his mid-30s, his uniform relatively clean, his insignia marking him as someone from a regimental or divisional staff, rather than a frontline platoon. He had the look of a man who understood maps and orders better than mud and blood. "Captain Reynolds," he introduced himself. "You are Chaplain Donovan?" "Yes." Reynolds studied him for a moment. "Your lieutenant says you picked up the gun when the machine gunner went down," Reynolds said. "Held off repeated assaults through the night, kept the enemy from overrunning this position and slaughtering the wounded." "That is mostly accurate," Donovan said. "I had help. Men around me fired. They held their sectors. It was not just me." "Sure," Reynolds said. "But a lot of those Krauts out there died because you did not let them get past this point." He nodded toward the approach on the German side. In the growing daylight, the damage was clearer. Bodies lay at intervals along the road, some alone, some in small clusters where a rush had ended all at once. The patterns were ugly and precise at the same time, the work of one focused weapon. Reynolds' gaze came back to him. "Geneva Convention says chaplains do not carry arms," the captain said. "Non-combatants, protected status. You know that, obviously." "Yes," Donovan said. "You violated that rule." "Yes." There was no point in trying to dance around it. The machine gun between them was evidence enough. "Why?" Reynolds asked. Donovan looked over his shoulder. The wounded were being loaded now, one by one, onto improvised stretchers and actual litters. The worst cases went first, moving slowly back toward the far bank under escort. Men who could still walk or limp did so, leaning on each other on rifles, on nothing but stubbornness. "Because if I did not," Donovan said, "those men would be dead. All of them." Reynolds was quiet for a few seconds. "You understand what this creates," the captain said. "In terms of precedent, optics. The Germans find out a chaplain picked up a gun. They can use that as an excuse. We shot a priest, but look, he was armed. They do it too. It chips at one of the few protections left in this mess." "I know," Donovan said. "Do you?" Reynolds' tone stayed level, but there was steel underneath. "Men like you are supposed to be untouchable," he went on. "You move through the worst of it, and do not get targeted." That only works if everyone agrees you are not a threat. You start strapping on guns, that line blurs, that puts every chaplain in danger. Maybe some medics too. Once you start making exceptions, his eyes narrowed slightly. Are you the exception, Chaplain? Reynolds asked. Or are you the new example? The question hit harder than Donovan expected. He had thought about vows, about sin, about personal guilt. He had not, in the rush of immediate survival, truly considered the ripple effect. Faces flashed in his mind. Men in black or olive drab uniforms with small crosses at their collars. He had met other chaplains in transit camps, on hospital ships, in training areas. Some were young, some old, some quietly cynical, others still painfully earnest. They walked into incoming fire because the ones on the ground needed them. They did it on the unspoken understanding that both sides acknowledged their role. He had just put a crack in that understanding. I did not do this to make a point, Donovan said. I did it because a dying man asked me to keep that gun firing, and because without it, we would not be having this conversation. Reynolds sighed through his nose. Good answer, he said. Unsatisfying, but good. He glanced at the men being carried past. You saved a lot of lives tonight, Reynolds said. That is not going to go unnoticed. People above my pay grade are going to want to pin things to your chest. I do not want a medal, Donovan said. The words out before he could stop them. That is not how this works, Reynolds replied. You do something like this. Command has to respond. It is not just about you. It is about the story they tell the rest of the army. Look at this. Look what our men do when cornered. They hold. He paused. Part of that story is going to be you, priest or not. Donovan's gaze drifted to the machine gun again. What story are they going to tell about that? He asked. That I broke my own calling, to become what I thought I was here to counterbalance? That is your sermon to write, Reynolds said. Not mine. He shifted his weight. There will be an inquiry, Reynolds continued. On paper, at least. Someone will ask if you compromised your protected status, if you created risk for yourself and others. But between you and me, he looked out at the slaughtered approach. If I were lying out there tonight with my guts in my hands, he said, I would have prayed for someone on this bridge to do exactly what you did. Collar or no collar. He clapped Donovan once, lightly, on the shoulder, the uninjured one, and moved on, barking orders to men still sorting the living from the dead. Left alone for a moment, Donovan stared at his hands. They were steady now. That bothered him more than the shaking had. Father? The voice, soft and hesitant, belonged to one of the wounded being prepared for transport. Private Jackson, chest wrapped tight, face pale but eyes very much alive. Yes? Donovan walked over. Jackson licked dry lips. Back there, Jackson said, nodding toward the machine gun. When it got really bad, I thought we were done. Then I heard that gun. Over and over, I knew you were on it. I could hear you yelling. I figured, if the chaplain is still shooting, maybe we have got a chance. He swallowed. I am not saying it makes sense, Jackson continued. I am just saying, it helped, knowing you were willing to stand there and do that. For us. The words landed heavy. You do not think less of me? Donovan asked quietly. For the killing? Jackson's brow furrowed. I watched my best friend die in front of me yesterday, he said. I have seen what the Germans did in that village up the road. I have seen civilians in ditches. I am not in a position to judge anyone who kept more of us alive than would have been otherwise. If I start judging you, I have to start judging myself. I am not going there." He raised a hand, fingers trembling. "Thank you," Jackson said simply. Donovan took his hand for a brief squeeze, then stepped back as the medics lifted the stretcher and carried him away. He felt the gratitude like a weight. Men he respected counted him as their protector now, not just their confessor. They had felt safer with him on the machine gun. They might never look at him the same way again. He was not sure he wanted them to. "Chaplain," another voice, older, with a different cadence. Donovan turned. An army chaplain, maybe 10 years his senior, approached along the fractured span. His uniform carried the same cross, but his was clean, his helmet marked clearly. The man's face was lined, his eyes sharp in a way that suggested he had spent a long time navigating both battlefields and headquarters. "Father Collins," he introduced himself. "Attached to division. I got word there was a situation involving one of ours." "I suppose that is one way to put it," Donovan said. Collins looked from Donovan to the gun and back again. "I saw what is on the other side of that approach," Collins said. "I talked briefly with Captain Reynolds. He seems torn between recommending you for a commendation and having a heart attack over what this does to our status." "He mentioned both," Donovan said. Collins almost smiled. "You are not the first priest to end up in a gray area," Collins said. "In the last war there were men who carried pistols under their cassocks or picked up rifles when things went bad. The official line stayed clean. Reality never did." "That does not make this right," Donovan said. "No," Collins replied. "It does not, but it also does not make it simple." He stepped closer, dropping his voice. "Right now, you are going to be pulled in 2 directions," Collins said. "One will tell you that what you did was heroic, necessary, even noble. Men you trust are going to press that narrative on you hard, because they need their world to work that way. The other voice will tell you that you betrayed everything you swore to stand for, that you stained your soul, maybe beyond repair." He held Donovan's gaze. Both of those voices are liars if you let them speak alone." Donovan frowned. "How do you mean?" he asked. "You did something ugly to prevent something uglier," Collins said. "That is not clean heroism. It is not pure betrayal. It is the kind of moral mud war drags us into whether we like it or not. If you let yourself be worshipped for it, you lose part of what makes you a priest. If you let yourself be crushed by it, you lose another part. Either way, the men behind you lose something they still need." "And what is that?" Donovan asked. "A chaplain who understands exactly how heavy their burdens are because he picked one up himself," Collins said. "You crossed a line. Fine. You cannot uncross it. The question is what you do with that knowledge." Donovan looked past him at the water flowing under the broken span. "Do you think God will forgive this?" he asked. Collins considered the question for longer than most men would have. "I think," Collins said slowly, "that if you had picked up that gun out of hatred or revenge or pride, you would not be standing here asking that question. You picked it up because you could not see a way to let those men die while you stayed clean." He gestured at the ruined town, the bodies, the wounded being carried. "If there is any place where mercy has to account for impossible choices," Collins said, "it is here." He touched the cross on his own collar. "You will still need to answer for it," Collins added, "inside yourself. Maybe in writing, maybe in confession when you are ready. But do not make the mistake of thinking the only two options are self-justification or self-destruction. He nodded once. I will recommend that the official story emphasize your care of the wounded and your presence under fire, Collins said. The details of who pulled what trigger can stay blurred. That protects you. It also protects the next priest who walks onto a battlefield with nothing but a cross and a bag of bandages. Is that honest? Donovan asked. It is war honest, Collins said, which is different from courtroom honest, or classroom honest, or pulpit honest, but sometimes it is the only version that keeps men alive. He let the words sit for a moment. Get some rest when you can, Collins said. The hardest part is not always the night you hold the bridge. Sometimes it is the mornings after, when everything is quiet enough for you to hear yourself think again. He left Donovan with that. As the evacuation continued, Donovan found himself drawn to the edge of the broken span. The river flowed below, indifferent. It had carried away men in both uniforms during the night, their last breaths swallowed by cold water and darkness. Now it glinted faintly in the morning light, as if nothing significant had happened above it. He thought of the German voice crying out for a medic, of the crawling man now trying to find shelter among the wreckage of a town hammered flat by shells. On the far bank, American infantry moved cautiously through the ruins, weapons ready, checking bodies, kicking guns away from hands that might still twitch. If he asked, if he pushed, if he insisted, maybe he could cross with them, find that wounded German, bandage him, sit with him as he died or lived. He did not move. Men around him still needed him here, the ones slipping under morphine, clinging to his voice as he murmured familiar words, the ones staring at the carnage with haunted eyes, needing someone to tell them that surviving this did not automatically make them monsters. He turned back to the bridge. Lewis stood there, hovering, unsure whether to approach. "What is it?" Donovan asked. We are loading the last of the wounded," Lewis said. "Those of us who can still walk, they want us to move back across, reorganize, get counted. Someone said there is coffee." His tone made it clear he doubted coffee could fix anything, but the idea had weight. "You should go," Donovan said. "You did your part. More than your part." Lewis hesitated. "What about you?" he asked. "I will be along," Donovan said. "There are still men who might not make it across without someone walking beside them." Lewis nodded slowly. "I meant what I said before," he added. "You looked different last night. You still do. But in a good way." Donovan was not sure there was a good way to look after a night like this, but he let the comment stand. One by one, the survivors began to leave the bridge. They moved slowly, carefully, as if afraid that a sudden step might wake some sleeping dragon beneath the stone. For some, each pace was an act of will. For others, adrenaline was finally fading, leaving nothing but shaking legs and hollow eyes. Eventually, only a few figures remained near the midpoint. A medic, finishing with a last bandage. 2 stretcher-bearers waiting for one more lift. And Father Michael Donovan, standing between the machine gun that had defined his night and the men whose lives it had preserved. He reached down and touched the gun one last time. Cold metal, scarred, functional, an instrument. Nothing more, nothing less. He had given it meaning it did not inherently possess. It had given him power he had never wanted. He turned away. As he walked toward the far bank, each step felt like crossing not just a river, but a fault line inside himself. On one side stood the priest who had deployed to Europe, believing there were clear roles: soldier, chaplain, healer, killer, sinner, saint. On the other stood the man who knew, with a clarity that would never fade, that sometimes all of those roles were forced into the same pair of shaking hands. The war had not ended at Ravensbrück Bridge. For Donovan, in a different way, it had just begun. The citation requirement cannot be properly followed for this chapter because there is no factual or external information to look up or verify, and tool access is disabled for this turn. So the scene has to be written purely as fiction, without any supporting sources. Below is the 5th chapter as requested, written in the same style and continuity as the previous ones. Chapter 5. Redemption at Dawn. The commendation came in a clean envelope that did not match anything else on the table. Everything around it was stained, bent, or worn. Coffee rings marked the wood. A Bible with a cracked spine lay open to a random page. Stacks of letters waited to be answered, some from families, some from men he had met only once in a field hospital and never saw again. The envelope was crisp, the paper inside smoother than anything Father Michael Donovan had touched in months. "Open it," Lieutenant Hayes said, sitting on the edge of the cot across from him. They were in a requisitioned farmhouse, 10 miles behind the current line. The walls still held faded family photos. A wedding portrait, a child in Sunday best, a man with a plow standing in front of a field that might not exist anymore. Outside, trucks rumbled and shouted orders drifted in with the cold air. Donovan stared at the envelope for a moment longer. "You already know what it is," Hayes said. "They do not use that kind of stationery for bad conduct." "That would be simpler," Donovan said. "At least it would fit." Hayes snorted. "Simple left the building the minute that bridge blew," he said. Donovan broke the seal. The words were exactly what he expected. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. The paragraph that followed turned Ravensbrück Bridge into something clean, almost elegant. It spoke of courage, of selfless service, of a lone chaplain manning a machine gun to protect the wounded against overwhelming odds. It did not mention the German voice crying out for a medic. It did not describe the crawling man he had chosen not to shoot at the end. It did not talk about the part of him that had wanted to throw the gun into the river and walk away. It was a story, nothing more. A necessary one, maybe, but a story all the same. "They are putting you in for a high one," Hayes said. "Not just a pat on the back. There will be a ceremony, speeches, maybe a band, if they can find one that is not already busy." "I do not want it," Donovan said quietly. "Does not matter," Hayes replied. "It stopped being about what you want when other men started using your name to make sense of what they went through." He nodded toward the paper. "Those words are not for you," Hayes said. "They are for their families, for the kids who ask what their fathers did in the war, for the men who are going to be sent across bridges like that next month and need to believe it is possible to come back." Donovan set the citation down carefully. "Do you believe it?" he asked. "Any of it?" Hayes leaned back against the wall, wincing as his still healing shoulder brushed the wood. "I believe that we were trapped on a broken bridge with wounded who could not move," he said. "I believe the Germans were not in the mood to take prisoners. I believe that if that gun had gone quiet, we would be dead. So yes, I believe the part where they say you kept us alive. That is not what I mean," Donovan said. I mean the part where this becomes noble. Hayes looked at him for a long moment. You are a priest, Father, he said. You know better than anyone that people need their pain to mean something. Call it noble, call it sacrifice, call it whatever helps them get out of bed. The facts on the ground do not change, but the way they live with those facts does. He reached for the citation, glanced at it, then handed it back. Let them pin their medal, Hayes said. Then you go back to doing what you were doing before you picked up that gun. Only now you are doing it with a clear picture of what these men are carrying. A knock on the door cut off anything Donovan might have said. Come in, Hayes called. A runner stepped in, young, flushed from the cold. Chaplain Donovan? He asked. Yes, Donovan said. They are asking for you at the aid station on the south side of the field, the runner said. We got a batch of wounded in from the last push. Some of them specifically asked if the Padre from the bridge was here. Donovan's stomach tightened at the phrase. The Padre from the bridge. It was already a title, a story traveling faster than he ever could. I am coming, he said. He stood, slid the citation back into the envelope, and tucked it into his bag. Do not lose that, Hayes said. Some general somewhere will be very offended. If I lose it, there will be a copy, Donovan said. He stepped out into the cold. The makeshift aid station was another barn, different wood, same smell. Men lay on cots and stretchers, their faces the same mix of numbness, fear, and relief he had seen in Sicily, Normandy, Belgium. The geography changed, the expressions did not. A nurse pointed him toward a row near the far wall. Two of the men there lifted their heads when they saw him. One was Private Lewis, his arm in a cast, his glasses finally replaced with a new pair that did not sit quite right on his nose yet. The other was Private Jackson, chest still wrapped tight, breathing carefully, but more easily than before. Father, Jackson said, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Look at you. You clean up almost respectable. Donovan glanced down at his uniform. It was no cleaner than usual, but someone in supply had insisted on issuing him a new collar insignia after the last one had been half torn off. The cross gleamed dully in the barn's light. They say you are famous now, Lewis said. Whole division is talking about you. Even heard somebody from another regiment mention that crazy priest with the 50. It was not a 50, Donovan said automatically, then caught himself. They laughed, the sound edged with pain, but real. You going to leave us for a desk job now? Jackson asked. Too important to hang around in barns with the rest of us? If they try to pull me off the line, you can all sign a petition, Donovan said. Until then, you are stuck with me. Lewis's expression softened. I am glad you are, he said. Stuck with us, I mean. A medic passed behind them, checking an IV, adjusting a bandage, moving on. Outside, a truck engine roared, then receded. For a moment, the world shrank again to this small island of faces. What did they tell you? Donovan asked quietly. About Ravenbrook. Lewis and Jackson exchanged a look. That we held, Jackson said. That we were outnumbered and cut off, and we held long enough for the others to break through. That the Germans will think twice before trying something like that again. They say you are getting a big medal, Lewis added. Some of the guys are already making jokes about it. Confession with the Medal of Honor, Chaplain. Line starts to the left. The words settled between them. Medal of Honor. The phrase did not feel like it belonged in his mouth. It is just metal, Donovan said. "It does not change what happened. It does not change who did not make it off that bridge." "No," Jackson said, "but it might change how the ones who did make it off carry it." He shifted slightly, wincing. "You remember when you told me I did not get to judge you unless I was willing to judge myself?" Jackson asked. "Yes." "Well, I have thought about it," Jackson said. "A lot. Lying here, listening to the trucks, smelling the soup. I do not want to spend the rest of my life replaying every shot I fired, or every one I did not. I figure, if you can find a way to live with what you did up there, maybe there is hope for the rest of us too." Donovan absorbed that in silence. He was not sure he had found any such way yet, but the idea that his struggle might give someone else permission to wrestle instead of collapse under the weight of it. There was something in that he could not dismiss. "Father." Another voice, weaker. On the cot beyond Jackson, a man Donovan did not immediately recognize shifted his head. Half his face was swathed in bandages. One eye was covered. The exposed one watched Donovan with a mix of curiosity and something like suspicion. "I was not there," the man said. "At the bridge. I heard about it from the guys who were. I heard you changed." "Changed how?" Donovan asked. "They say you were yelling like a sergeant," the man said. "That you swore. That you laughed when a round landed short. That you enjoyed some of it." The barn seemed to tighten around them for a second. Donovan let the accusation hang in the air before he answered. "Parts of it felt simple," he said, quietly. "There is a kind of clarity in a moment, when the only choice is between letting someone shoot the men behind you or stopping him. The brain likes simple. It tries to lean into it. That is dangerous. It is how people get lost." The man watched him. "Did you like it?" he asked. Donovan did not look away. "I liked that the men behind me were still breathing when the sun came up," he said. "I did not like what it cost to buy that. I do not like that there were seconds where I did not feel anything at all while I was doing it." He let the words settle. "I am not proud of those seconds," he said, "but pretending they did not happen would be worse." The bandaged man exhaled slowly. "My brother is a priest," he said, "back home. He wrote me that he prays every day he will never have to make choices like ours. I think after this, I am glad it was you on that bridge and not him." "Why?" Donovan asked. "Because you know what it feels like now," the man said. "He does not, and I am not sure he could take it." The barn door creaked open. Another chaplain stepped in, someone Donovan did not know. Younger, fresh insignia, eyes that had not yet learned to recognize the difference between a man who was in pain and a man who was simply remembering. He paused when he saw Donovan, nodded respectfully, then moved toward the opposite side of the barn, where another line of cots waited. Younger men were coming to take up the role. The war was not done asking for souls to walk into the worst of it, with nothing but words and a thin metal cross. Later, much later, after another transfer, another march, another town reduced to rubble, Donovan finally found a quiet corner to sit and write. The letter was addressed to his bishop. He stared at the blank page for a long time before the first words came. He did not write about medals. He did not write about commendations, or the exact number of enemy dead, or the details of how many belts he had gone through before dawn. He did not describe the bridge in tactical language, or summarize it as a victory pulled from the jaws of defeat. He wrote about Morrison and the promise he had made over a dying man's last breaths. He wrote about Chen, asking not to die a coward, and never knowing that his last act had been to cross a bridge into a trap and keep walking anyway. He wrote about the German voice crying "medic" from the other side, and about the way his own hands had refused to move when every part of him screamed to go. He wrote about the weight of the gun and the weight of the silence after. He did not ask for absolution in a neat line. He laid out the facts as he remembered them, as clearly as he could, with none of the smoothing he had seen in the official citation. At the end, he added one more paragraph. "I do not know yet how to carry this," he wrote. "I know only that I cannot pretend it did not happen, and I cannot fully condemn it, without also condemning the men who are alive because of it. If there is guidance for a soul that has both killed and held the dying in the same hour, I will take it." He signed his name. Father Michael Donovan, Chaplain, United States Army, the Padre from the bridge. He folded the letter, sealed it, and handed it off to the field post when the chance came. It might take weeks or months to reach its destination. Answers, if any, would take longer. In the meantime, there was work, more convoys, more barns, more nights where shells drew jagged lines against the sky, and men whispered prayers into the dark, sometimes addressed to God, sometimes addressed to no one in particular. On one of those nights, sitting by a cot, where a young soldier drifted in and out of consciousness, Donovan noticed something. For the first time since Ravensbrück, when a man reached for his hand and asked, "Father, are my sins too much?" he did not feel like an observer offering comfort from a higher place. He felt like someone sitting in the same mud, under the same weight, a man who had crossed a line and come back with dirt on his soul and blood on his uniform. "I do not know if they are too much," he said, honestly. "But I know mine are not light either, and I am still here. So are you. Maybe that is where we start." The soldier nodded weakly, eyes closing, fingers still wrapped around Donovan's. Outside, artillery rolled on. Inside, in that barn, on that night, absolution was not a clean exchange of confession and forgiveness. It was two men agreeing that survival itself came with a cost, and that the work of living with that cost might be the closest thing to redemption they would get this side of home. The bridge at Ravensbrück faded into the endless list of place names and dispatches and histories. For most, it became a line on a map, a footnote in an operation, another point where one side advanced and the other fell back. For the men who had been there, and for the chaplain who had picked up a machine gun when no one else could, it remained something else. Not a miracle, not a legend. A night on a broken span of stone where a man sworn to save lives had taken them instead, and then spent every day after trying to make sure that choice did not define him completely, but did not disappear either. The war would end. The river under Ravensbrück Bridge would keep flowing. And somewhere, long after the uniforms were folded away, and the medals, if they survived, were pushed to the back of drawers, there would still be a man who woke before dawn sometimes, with the sound of a machine gun in his ears and a single, stubborn thought in his chest. If given the same night, with the same men behind him and the same enemy in front, he would pick up the gun again, and then spend the rest of his life learning how to live with that truth.